The blood bag slipped from Priscilla Ashford's trembling fingers, splattering crimson across the sterile white floor of the sanctuary clinic, and she knew before anyone spoke that the whispers would start again. "Clumsy cow," someone muttered from behind the supply counter. Priscilla didn't turn around. She'd learned years ago that acknowledging the cruelty only fed it, made it grow like mold in darkness. Instead, she knelt, her generous curves making the movement awkward, and began mopping up the spilled blood with paper towels while her cheeks burned with humiliation. The sanctuary was supposed to be a place of healing, a neutral ground where humans and vampires coexisted under carefully negotiated treaties. Here in the heart of New York City, beneath the gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets, an entire network of underground facilities served the vampire population. The clinic where Priscilla worked provided medical care for humans who served vampire households, treated injuries from feeding accidents, and occasionally tended to vampires themselves when their supernatural healing failed them. Priscilla had trained for 5 years to become a healer, studying both traditional medicine and the specialized techniques required for vampire physiology. She'd graduated top of her class, her hands steady and sure, her diagnostic instincts sharper than anyone else's. But none of that mattered here. What mattered was that she didn't look like the other healers, the slender, graceful women and men who moved through the halls like dancers, who fit the aesthetic that vampires apparently preferred. "I don't understand why they even hired her," another voice chimed in, this one belonging to Marcus, a physician's assistant who never missed an opportunity to make Priscilla's life miserable. "Vampires value beauty and elegance. She's neither." Priscilla's hands stilled for just a moment on the blood-soaked towels. The words shouldn't hurt anymore. She'd heard variations of them her entire life, long before she'd entered the vampire human medical field. But they did hurt, like paper cuts that never quite healed, always ready to split open again. She finished cleaning the spill, disposed of the towels in the biohazard container, and stood. Her supervisor, Dr. Helena Vance, watched from across the room with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been calculation. Priscilla couldn't tell anymore. "Ashford," Helena called out, her voice crisp and professional. "You're on call tonight for emergency interventions. Try not to drop anything vital." The other staff members laughed, and Priscilla nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Emergency calls were rare but intense, usually vampire nobility who'd been injured in ways that prevented their natural healing, or blood bond complications that required immediate intervention. Most of the other healers coveted those assignments because they often came with generous compensation and the possibility of patronage from powerful vampire families. Priscilla gathered her supplies and retreated to the small on-call room, a windowless space with a narrow bed and a desk cluttered with medical texts. She'd spent countless nights here over the past 2 years, waiting for emergencies that rarely came her way. The more prestigious cases always went to the other healers, the ones who looked the part. She pulled out her worn journal and began to write, a habit she'd maintained since childhood. The pages were filled with observations about vampire physiology, notes on successful treatments, theories about why certain healing techniques worked better than others. Writing helped her think, helped her process the constant rejection and humiliation. It reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. Priscilla had been 17 when her younger brother contracted a rare blood disease. The human doctors had given up, but a vampire healer passing through their small Connecticut town had saved his life with techniques that seemed like magic. The vampire's hands had glowed with soft golden light, and Priscilla had watched in awe as her brother's color returned, his breathing steadied, his fever broke. The vampire had looked at her afterward and said, "You have the gift. I can see it in your aura. Don't waste it." That vampire had been ancient and beautiful in that otherworldly way they all were, with paper-white skin and silver hair that fell past her shoulders. She'd smiled at Priscilla with genuine warmth, seeing something in her that others missed. That moment had changed everything. Now, 6 years later, Priscilla clung to that memory when the mockery became too much. She had the gift. She knew she did. Her hands could sense things other healers missed, could detect the subtle imbalances in blood chemistry, could channel healing energy with precision and power. If only someone would give her a real chance to prove it. The emergency pager buzzed against her hip at midnight, jolting her from an uneasy doze. She'd fallen asleep at the desk, her cheek pressed against a textbook about vampire cardiac systems. The message on the pager made her heart stop. Critical emergency. Vampire royalty. Immediate response required. All available healers to Trauma Bay 1. Priscilla grabbed her medical kit and ran, her body moving with a speed and grace that always surprised people who judged her by appearance alone. She might not be slender, but she was strong and fast when it mattered. She burst through the Trauma Bay doors just seconds after the other on-call healers arrived. The scene before her was chaos. 6 vampire guards, all with that distinctive white skin and hair that marked their kind, stood in a defensive circle around a gurney. Their eyes glowed red with agitation and barely controlled rage. On the gurney lay a male vampire, and even from across the room, Priscilla could feel the raw power emanating from him. Doctor. Vance was already there, barking orders. Silver poisoning, massive trauma to the chest cavity. He's not healing. We need to extract the fragments and flush his system immediately. Priscilla pushed closer, her healer's instincts overriding her usual timidity. She could see the injured vampire now, and her breath caught. He was extraordinary even by vampire standards. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his white hair longer than most, falling in waves around a face that could have been carved from marble. But it was his aura that truly stunned her. She could see it, a deep crimson shot through with gold, pulsing weakly around his body. This wasn't just vampire royalty. This was someone truly ancient and powerful. Who is he? Marcus whispered, and one of the guards answered in a voice like grinding stone. Lord Gavril Aramis, king of the Eastern Territories. If he dies, there will be war. The words sent a chill through everyone present. The Eastern Territories comprised half of the vampire-controlled lands in North America. Gavril Aramis was a legend, one of the oldest vampires in existence, a warrior king who'd maintained peace through strength and strategic brilliance for centuries. His death would create a power vacuum that would shatter the fragile human-vampire treaties. Dr. Vance's hands shook as she approached the gurney, and Priscilla realized with horror that her supervisor was afraid. The pressure of this situation was too much. One wrong move and they'd all be held responsible for a king's death. The silver's embedded too deep, one of the other healers said, their voice rising with panic. It's surrounding his heart. We can't extract it without killing him. Priscilla moved without thinking, her body responding to years of training and instinct. She pushed through the circle of healers and placed her hands on Gavril's chest, feeling for the damage. The moment her skin made contact with his, energy surged through her like lightning. She gasped, nearly pulling away, but forced herself to focus. "Get her away from him!" Dr. Vance shouted, but Priscilla was already lost in the diagnostic trance, her gift taking over. She could feel everything now, the silver fragments like frozen stars scattered through his tissue, the poison spreading through his bloodstream, the way his ancient heart struggled to beat against the foreign metal. But she could also feel something else, pathways of energy, channels that connected all the silver pieces. If she could just manipulate those channels, redirect the flow. "I can do this," she whispered, and her hands began to glow with golden light. The guards moved as if to pull her away, but Gavril's eyes suddenly snapped open. They were the deepest crimson Priscilla had ever seen, ancient and infinite. He stared directly at her, and she felt his consciousness brush against hers, a king taking the measure of someone who held his life in their hands. "Let her work," he rasped, his voice rough with pain but carrying absolute authority. The room went silent. Priscilla felt the weight of every eye on her, the skepticism and doubt so thick she could taste it. This was her moment. Prove herself or fail spectacularly in front of vampire royalty and her worst critics. She closed her eyes and let her gift flow freely. The golden light intensified, spreading across Gavril's chest like sunrise. She could feel the silver now, could sense how it had fragmented on impact, how each piece was lodged in tissue that couldn't heal around it. Normal extraction would require cutting him open further, and he'd lost too much blood for that. But there was another way. Priscilla had read about it in ancient texts, a technique so old that most modern healers dismissed it as myth. The texts called it blood singing, using the healer's energy to make the patient's blood itself become a tool, to move foreign objects from the inside out. It required perfect control and immense power. It was also incredibly dangerous. If she lost focus for even a second, she could stop his heart entirely, but she could feel it working. The silver fragments began to move, drawn toward her hands by the magnetic pull of her energy working through his blood. She pulled gently, steadily, singing under her breath an old melody her grandmother had taught her, something about moonlight and healing. The first fragment emerged through his skin like a silver tear, then another, and another. Priscilla worked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, extracting each piece of silver until finally, blessedly, she felt his heart beat stronger. His natural healing kicked in, vampire regeneration finally able to do its work now that the poison was removed. She extracted the final fragment, a piece that had been lodged dangerously close to his heart and nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Strong hands caught her vampire hands, cool and steady. She looked up to find Gavril sitting up on the gurney, fully conscious now, staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice resonating through her entire body. "Priscilla Ashford," she managed, suddenly aware of how she must look sweaty, disheveled, her generous figure wrapped in unflattering scrubs, her dark hair escaping its ponytail. "Priscilla," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a prayer. "You saved my life." "Doctor." Vance stepped forward quickly, her professional mask back in place. "Lord Aramis, we're so relieved you're recovering. The entire team worked—" "No," Gavril interrupted, his crimson eyes never leaving Priscilla's face. "She worked. She alone. I felt her power, her precision. I have lived for 8 centuries, and I have never encountered a healer of such extraordinary gift." The room erupted in whispers. Priscilla felt dizzy, unsure if this was real or some exhaustion-induced hallucination. A vampire king was complimenting her, defending her, looking at her like she was someone precious. Marcus stepped forward, his expression twisted with barely concealed jealousy. "Lord Aramis, Miss Ashford is still in training. Surely you'd prefer a more experienced—" "I prefer the woman who just pulled silver from my heart with nothing but her hands and her will," Gavril said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "And I will reward her accordingly." He turned back to Priscilla. "You will come with me. I require a personal healer, and I can think of no one more qualified." "My lord, that's highly irregular," Dr. Vance protested. "There are protocols, contracts to negotiate." "Then negotiate them," Gavril said, standing from the gurney with fluid grace. The trauma that had nearly killed him might as well have never happened. His chest was completely healed, not even a scar remaining. "But understand this. Priscilla Ashford is now under my personal protection. Anyone who speaks ill of her or treats her with anything less than the respect due to a royal healer will answer to me directly." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Priscilla watched Marcus go pale, watched Dr. Vance's calculating expression return. They were already reassessing, already realizing how badly they'd miscalculated by dismissing her. One of Gavril's guards approached with a long coat, draping it over the king's bare shoulders. Gavril never looked away from Priscilla. "Go home," he told her gently. "Rest. My people will contact you tomorrow with the details of your new position." "And Priscilla?" He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him, something dark and spiced, like cloves in midnight. "Thank you. I owe you a debt that can never truly be repaid, but I will spend considerable time trying." Then he was gone, sweeping from the trauma bay with his guards in tow, leaving Priscilla standing in stunned silence among her slack-jawed colleagues. The next 3 days were a whirlwind. Vampire lawyers arrived at her tiny apartment with contracts and non-disclosure agreements. The compensation package alone was enough to make her head spin more money than she'd make in 5 years at the sanctuary, plus room and board in the royal residence, access to the most extensive medical libraries in the vampire world, and a title that apparently came with significant social standing among vampire society. Priscilla's parents called, frantic with worry and excitement in equal measure. Her mother couldn't decide if this was the opportunity of a lifetime or a death sentence. Her father, ever practical, wanted to know if the contract had been reviewed by a lawyer. Her younger brother, fully recovered now and attending college, just kept saying, "You saved a vampire king. This is the coolest thing ever." On the 4th day, a sleek black car arrived to transport her to Gavril's residence. Priscilla had packed her meager belongings, mostly books and medical supplies, and dressed in the nicest outfit she owned, a deep green dress that she'd bought for her graduation. It actually fit her well, hugging her curves in a way that made her feel almost pretty, but she still felt a flutter of anxiety as the car pulled up to a building in Manhattan's financial district. The driver, another pale-skinned, white-haired vampire, ushered her through a lobby that screamed wealth and power. But instead of going up, they went down, descending in a private elevator that plunged deep beneath the city. When the doors opened, Priscilla stepped into another world. The royal residence was a palace hidden in the earth. Soaring ceilings were carved from stone and reinforced with steel. Chandeliers dripped crystal light, and everywhere she looked were tapestries, paintings, and artifacts that must have been centuries old. Vampires moved through the halls with that characteristic grace, all of them dressed in elegant clothing that seemed to blur the line between modern and historical. Miss Ashford, a female vampire, greeted her, this one with white hair braided in an intricate crown. I am Seraphine, Lord Aramis's chamberlain. Welcome to the Court of Shadows. The king is eager to see you. Priscilla followed Seraphine through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms filled with books and laboratories and what looked like a training arena. Finally, they reached a set of ornate double doors carved with ravens and roses. The king's private study, Seraphine said, knocking twice before opening the doors. Gavril stood before a massive window, or what looked like a window, though they were underground. Priscilla realized it must be some sort of screen displaying the city above in real time. He turned when she entered, and the sight of him struck her breathless all over again. He wore modern clothing, black trousers, and a deep burgundy shirt, but something about him screamed ancient royalty. His white hair was pulled back in a low tail, revealing the sharp angles of his face. Those crimson eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Priscilla, he said, and again that sensation of hearing her name transformed into something beautiful. Thank you for coming. You didn't really give me much choice, she said, then immediately wanted to bite her tongue. You didn't sass a vampire king. But Gavril smiled, genuine amusement lighting his features. No, I suppose I didn't. I apologize for my presumption. But I meant what I said. You are extraordinarily gifted, and I find myself in need of someone with your talents. The silver poisoning, how did it happen? She asked, her healer's instincts kicking in. I've never seen vampire wounds resist healing like that. His expression darkened. An assassination attempt, silver bullets designed specifically to fragment on impact, created by those who would see the Eastern Territories fall into chaos. I have enemies, Priscilla. Many of them. And some are willing to use weapons that violate every treaty we've established. So you need a healer close by in case it happens again, she said, understanding now. I need you close by, he corrected. Your gift is unlike anything I've encountered in 800 years. When you touched me, when you used your power to heal me, I felt... He paused, seeming to search for words. I felt safe. For the first time in decades, perhaps longer, I felt as though someone could actually protect me from the things that hunt in darkness. Priscilla felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm just a healer. I'm not... You are not just anything, Gavril interrupted, moving closer. And I will not tolerate you diminishing yourself. I heard what they said about you at the sanctuary. The mockery, the cruelty. It ends now. Here, you will be valued for what you are, a healer of remarkable skill and even more remarkable courage. Tears pricked at Priscilla's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of a vampire king. Why does it matter to you? You barely know me. I know that you saved my life without hesitation, despite having every reason to let me die, he said softly. I know that you were afraid, but did it anyway. I know that you possess a gift that should be celebrated and honored, not mocked. And I know. He paused, his expression becoming almost vulnerable. I know that when I woke up with your hands on my chest and your light flowing through me, something in me recognized something in you. We are connected now, Priscilla. Whether you believe in fate or not, I do, and I believe you were meant to save me. Priscilla's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. Vampire kings didn't form connections with plus-size human healers from Connecticut. This was a professional arrangement, nothing more. She needed to remember that. I'll do my best to serve you well, she said, trying to inject formality into her tone. When do I start? Gavril studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her attempts at emotional distance. You start now. Let me show you your quarters and the medical facilities we've prepared for you. The quarters turned out to be a suite larger than her entire apartment, decorated in rich jewel tones with a bedroom, sitting room, and private bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel. The medical facility was even more impressive, a fully equipped clinic with technology that most hospitals would envy, and a library of medical texts that made her hands itch to start reading. This is incredible, she breathed, running her fingers over the spines of ancient books. Some of these texts are supposed to be lost. Nothing is truly lost, Gavril said from behind her. It simply waits to be found by someone who can appreciate it. These are yours now, Priscilla. All of this is yours. And should you need anything else, you have only to ask. She turned to face him, struck again by the contradiction he presented, deadly and gentle, ancient and somehow young, powerful beyond measure, but looking at her like she was the one with all the power. I don't understand you, she admitted. Why treat me like I'm someone special? You could have any healer you wanted. But I don't want any healer, he said simply. I want you. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that Priscilla didn't dare examine too closely. This was her employer, a vampire king, someone so far above her station that the very idea of anything beyond professional respect was laughable. Except he wasn't laughing. He was looking at her with something that might have been wonder. I should let you rest, Gavril said, seeming to sense her overwhelmed state. But there's one more thing. Tomorrow night, there's a gathering of the territorial lords, a formal event where I'll be announcing new policies and initiatives. I would like you to attend as my guest. As your healer, she corrected. As my guest, he repeated firmly. I want the other lords and ladies to see you, to understand that you are under my protection and worthy of their respect. Will you come? How could she say no? This was part of her job now, being visible, representing her position in his household. I'll need something to wear. I don't exactly have formal vampire court attire in my wardrobe. Gavril's smile was dazzling. Consider it done. I'll have Seraphine arrange everything. Until tomorrow night, Priscilla. He left her alone in her new suite, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. 4 days ago, she'd been cleaning blood off the floor while her colleagues mocked her. Now she was living in a vampire palace, employed by a king who looked at her like she was precious. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to hope. The next evening, Seraphine arrived with a team of vampire attendants carrying garment bags and cases of accessories. Priscilla tried to protest she could dress herself, but Seraphine just smiled knowingly. Lord Aramis wants you to feel confident tonight, the Chamberlain said. These gatherings can be intimidating. Let us help you make an entrance. What followed was 2 hours of pampering that left Priscilla feeling like she'd stumbled into a fairy tale. They styled her dark hair in elegant waves, applied makeup that enhanced her features without making her feel like someone else, and then brought out the dress. It was midnight blue velvet, the color of the sky at twilight, with a neckline that showed off her collarbones and a silhouette that celebrated her curves instead of trying to hide them. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked sophisticated, beautiful, powerful. The king has impeccable taste, Seraphine murmured approvingly. You look stunning, Miss Ashford. Gavril was waiting for her in the main hall, and the expression on his face when he saw her made Priscilla's breath catch. His eyes darkened, that crimson deepening to burgundy, and he stared at her like a man seeing sunrise for the first time. Priscilla, he said, his voice rougher than usual, you are magnificent. You clean up pretty well yourself, she managed, taking in his formal attire, a black suit that probably cost more than her entire former wardrobe, tailored perfectly to his lean, powerful frame. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the cool strength of him even through layers of fabric. Together, they entered the grand ballroom where the gathering was being held. Priscilla had thought Gavril's residence was impressive, but the ballroom was breathtaking. It was enormous, the ceiling lost in shadows above them, lit by thousands of candles and chandeliers that actually floated overhead. Vampires filled the space, all of them dressed in finery that ranged from modern elegance to historical grandeur. And every single one of them turned to look as Gavril entered with Priscilla on his arm. She felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispers start immediately. But Gavril's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a gentle pressure of reassurance. "Ignore them," he murmured. "You belong here as much as any of them." A male vampire approached, this one with white hair cropped short and eyes like chips of amber. "Lord Aramis," he greeted with a slight bow. "We're relieved to see you recovered from your recent incident." "Thank you, Lord Victor. Allow me to introduce Priscilla Ashford, my personal healer and honored guest. Priscilla, this is Lord Victor Corvus, who governs the Western Territories." Victor's gaze swept over Priscilla, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. A human healer. How progressive of you, Gavril. Though I must admit, I would have expected you to choose someone more. More what? Gavril's voice dropped to a dangerous purr, and the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to plummet. Victor wisely reconsidered his words. Someone with less talent, perhaps. I've heard remarkable things about Miss Ashford's gift. To save you from silver fragmentation poisoning is no small feat. Indeed, Gavril agreed, his tone still carrying an edge. Priscilla's abilities are unparalleled. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate that she has agreed to serve in my court. Other vampires approached throughout the evening, some genuinely curious, others clearly skeptical. Priscilla found herself answering questions about healing techniques, discussing vampire physiology, even debating the merits of various ancient medical texts. Despite her initial anxiety, she realized she was actually enjoying herself. These vampires, for all their power and immortality, were genuinely interested in her knowledge, and Gavril never left her side. He stood close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him, could catch that spiced scent that seemed uniquely his. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness, pride evident in every glance. Midway through the evening, a female vampire approached, this one stunning even by vampire standards. Her white hair fell to her waist in a perfect sheet, and her gown looked like it was woven from moonlight itself. "Gavril," she said, her voice like honey, "surely you're not going to spend the entire evening hovering over your little pet. Dance with me, for old time's sake." Priscilla felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, which was ridiculous. She had no claim on Gavril. "Lady Isolde," Gavril said coolly, "I believe we agreed that old times were best left in the past, and Priscilla is not a pet. She's a valued member of my household and deserving of your respect." Isolde's eyes narrowed. "You've grown soft, my lord. Since when does the feared king of the Eastern Territories concern himself with the feelings of humans?" "Since one of them saved my life with courage and skill that would put most of your court to shame," Gavril replied, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Now, if you'll excuse us." He guided Priscilla away, his hand firm on the small of her back. She could feel tension radiating from him. "Old girlfriend?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Old mistake," he corrected. "Isolde and I were involved briefly about 2 centuries ago. It ended poorly, and she's never quite forgiven me for it." 2 centuries. The reminder of just how old Gavril was should have been unsettling. Instead, Priscilla found herself curious about all the years he'd lived, all the things he'd seen. "You must get bored," she said. "Living so long, seeing everything change over and over." Gavril looked down at her, his expression softening. "I was bored. For a very long time, actually. Until 4 nights ago, when a brave healer with golden light in her hands reminded me that there are still things in this world capable of surprising me." Priscilla's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Gavril, dance with me," he said suddenly. "I know you heard Isolde, and I want to make something clear to everyone in this room." Before she could protest, he was leading her onto the dance floor. Music swelled around them, something orchestral and haunting. Gavril pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. They began to move, and Priscilla discovered that he danced the way he did everything else, with fluid grace and absolute confidence. "I'm not very good at this," she whispered, trying to follow his lead. "You're perfect," he countered, Stop doubting yourself. I have you. Just trust me." So she did. She let him guide her across the floor, let herself feel the strength in his arms and the cool solidity of his body. Around them, other vampires danced, but Priscilla was barely aware of them. All she could focus on was Gavril, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, the way he held her close enough that she could feel his words when he spoke. "Do you know what happens when a vampire finds someone they truly value?" he asked softly, his lips close to her ear. "What?" she breathed. "We become rather possessive, protective. We don't take kindly to anyone who threatens or demeans what's ours." "I'm not yours," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Aren't you?" His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You wear my colors. You live in my home. You carry my protection. And when I look at you, I feel things I haven't felt in centuries. Tell me, Priscilla, what does that make you, if not mine?" She should have pulled away. Should have reminded him that this was a professional arrangement, that she was his employee, nothing more. But the words wouldn't come. Because standing here in his arms, surrounded by vampire nobility, feeling desired and protected and valued for the first time in her life, she didn't want to be practical. She wanted to be reckless. "I don't know," she admitted. "This is all happening so fast. A week ago, I was nobody. Now I'm dancing with a king, and he's looking at me like you're precious beyond measure," Gavril finished. "Because you are, Priscilla. And I know it's fast. I know you probably think I'm being impulsive, or that this is some sort of vampire compulsion, but I've lived 800 years and I've learned to recognize when something is important. You are important. To me. In ways I'm only beginning to understand." The song ended, but they stood there for a moment longer, caught in each other's gaze. Finally, reluctantly, Gavril stepped back. "We should," he began, but stopped abruptly, his entire body going rigid. His nostrils flared, and his eyes blazed suddenly bright red. "Get behind me. Now." Priscilla moved instantly, her healer instincts recognizing danger, even if she couldn't see it yet. Around them, other vampires were reacting similarly, their conversations cutting off, their bodies shifting into defensive postures. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Hunters," Gavril growled. "In the building. I can smell the silver." Chaos erupted. The ballroom doors exploded inward, and armed humans poured through, at least a dozen of them, all carrying weapons that gleamed with silver. They moved with military precision, forming a perimeter, their guns trained on the vampires. "Nobody move!" one of them shouted. "We have silver rounds and we're not afraid to use them. We know Lord Aramis is here. Hand him over, and the rest of you get to live." Priscilla felt Gavril's body coil with tension. He was preparing to fight, to defend his people even if it meant sacrificing himself. The noble idiot. "Stand down!" Gavril commanded his guards, who had moved to surround him. "I won't have a massacre in my own home." "How touching," the lead hunter sneered. "The great Gavril Aramis, always so concerned with his people. Too bad they're going to watch you die." He raised his weapon, and everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Priscilla saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the weapon aimed directly at Gavril's chest, where his heart still bore the newly healed scars from the last attack. Without thinking, purely on instinct, she threw herself forward. "No!" Gavril's roar shook the walls, but she was already moving, already putting her body between him and the bullet. The impact was like being struck by lightning. White-hot agony exploded in her shoulder, and she felt the burn of silver entering her bloodstream. She was human. Silver shouldn't affect her like this, but these bullets were different, she realized through the haze of pain. They were designed to poison anyone they touched, human or vampire. She hit the ground hard, distantly aware of Gavril catching her, of his face above hers, twisted with anguish and fury. Then everything erupted. Gavril's guards attacked the hunters with a violence that was terrifying to witness. Vampires moved with inhuman speed and strength, disarming and subduing the attackers in seconds. But Gavril never moved from her side. "Priscilla, no, no, no," he was saying, his hands hovering over her wound as if afraid to touch her. "Why would you do that? Why would you? Couldn't let them kill you," she gasped out, feeling the poison spreading. "You're too important." "You're important," he shouted, and she'd never heard such raw emotion in anyone's voice. You foolish, brave, perfect woman. Don't you dare die. Don't you dare leave me. She could feel herself fading, the poison working faster than she'd anticipated. Her healing gift was trying to fight it, but this was beyond anything she'd encountered. She looked up at Gavril's face, memorized the sharp angles and the crimson eyes now bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Wanted more time with you." "Then take it," he said fiercely. He bit into his own wrist, tearing the flesh open. Dark blood welled immediately. "Drink, Priscilla. My blood can save you." She knew what he was offering. Vampire blood could heal humans, but it also created a bond, connected them in ways that were poorly understood. Some who drank vampire blood became dependent on it. Others developed strange abilities, and sometimes, rarely, it led to the person being turned. "The risks," she tried to say, but he pressed his bleeding wrist to her lips. "Damn the risks! I am not losing you. Drink, please." His blood touched her tongue, cold and strange, tasting of metal and something else, something wild and old. Her body reacted immediately, some deep instinct taking over. She drank, feeling his blood flow into her, feeling it chase the poison from her system. The pain receded, replaced by a tingling warmth that spread from her core to her extremities. Gavril held her as she drank, his other hand stroking her hair, his voice a constant murmur of reassurance and encouragement. Finally, when the bullet wound had closed and the poison was neutralized, he gently pulled his wrist away. "That's enough," he said softly. "You're safe now. You're safe." Priscilla sat up slowly, aware that every vampire in the ballroom was staring at them. Gavril had just blood-bonded a human in front of the entire territorial court. The political implications were staggering. "The hunters?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "Subdued," one of Gavril's guards reported. "We've called the Vampire Council authorities. They'll be dealt with according to treaty law." Gavril helped Priscilla to her feet, his arm around her waist, supporting her. "The gathering is over," he announced to the room. "Return to your territories. We'll reconvene when I've dealt with whoever orchestrated this attack." The vampires began filing out, though many cast curious glances at Priscilla. She heard whispers, speculation about the bond, about what it meant. But Gavril ignored them all, guiding Priscilla back toward his private quarters. Once they were alone in his study, he finally seemed to lose the iron control he'd maintained. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "Never again," he said, his voice muffled. "Never put yourself in danger like that again. I can't. Priscilla, I can't bear the thought of losing you." She wrapped her arms around him, feeling how he trembled against her. "You were going to let them kill you. I've lived 800 years. You've barely lived at all. Your life is infinitely more valuable." "Not to me," she said. "To me, your life is everything." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his crimson eyes searching her face. "Why?" "Because I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it's insane. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Gavril. I think I started loving you the moment you woke up and looked at me like I was something precious instead of something to mock." His hands came up to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle. "You love me." "I love you," she repeated, no longer afraid to say it. "Priscilla Ashford," he said, and his voice was shaking. "I have lived for centuries. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have known power and wealth and pleasure. But I have never, not once in all those years, felt what I feel when I look at you. You make me want to be better. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't since my human life ended. I love you. Completely. Eternally. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of your life proving it to you every single day." "The rest of my life?" she asked. "Not yours?" His expression became solemn. "I am immortal, Priscilla. You are not. That is the tragedy of what we are. Unless—" He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Unless you chose to become like me, to turn. But that is a decision I would never pressure you into. Your mortality is precious. Your humanity is part of what makes you so extraordinary." Priscilla considered his words carefully. She thought about growing old while he stayed forever young. Thought about dying and leaving him alone. thought about all the things they could experience together if time was no longer an enemy. "I need time to think about that," she said honestly. "But Gavril, however much time we have, mortal or immortal, I want to spend it with you." "Then you shall have me," he promised, "for as long as you want me." "That might be forever," she warned. "I certainly hope so," he said. He was kissing her. It was nothing like she'd expected. His lips were cool but not cold, firm and demanding, but also achingly tender. He kissed her like she was precious, like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. She kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside, letting him feel her love, her desire, her absolute certainty that this strange, impossible thing between them was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least she was breathing hard, he didn't actually need to breathe, Gavril rested his forehead against hers. "I need to keep you safe," he murmured. "These attacks are getting more frequent, more sophisticated. Someone wants me dead badly enough to violate every treaty, to risk war between humans and vampires." "Then we find out who," Priscilla said, "and we stop them, together." Over the following weeks, Priscilla settled into her new life in Gavril's court. She worked in the medical facilities, treating members of the vampire household and occasionally human servants who lived in the underground residence. Her reputation grew as word spread of her gift, and soon vampires from other territories were requesting her services. But mostly, she spent time with Gavril. They talked for hours, sharing stories her relatively short life and his impossibly long one. He told her about his human life in medieval Romania, about the vampire who'd turned him during a battle, about the centuries that followed as he'd built his power and territory. She told him about growing up in Connecticut, about the brother she'd saved, about every cruel word and dismissive glance that had shaped her into someone who doubted her own worth. "They were fools," Gavril said one evening as they sat in his study, her curled against his side on a luxurious sofa. "Anyone who looked at you and saw anything less than extraordinary was a fool." "I'm not extraordinary," she protested, though the words had less conviction now. It was hard to doubt herself when he looked at her like she hung the moon. "You are to me," he said simply, "and my opinion is the only one that matters." She laughed at his arrogance, but also felt warmth bloom in her chest. He made her feel valued in a way no one else ever had. And she realized she was doing the same for him, reminding him that there was more to existence than politics and power, that even an immortal could find joy in simple things. They also investigated the attacks. Gavril's network of informants worked tirelessly to trace the hunters back to their source. The trail led them through several human extremist groups who opposed the human-vampire treaties, but the money funding the operation came from somewhere else entirely. "It's vampire gold," Gavril explained grimly, showing her the financial records his people had uncovered. "Someone in the vampire world is funding human hunters to kill me." "Who would benefit from your death?" Priscilla asked. "Several potential heirs," he said. "I have no direct descendants, no one I've designated as successor. If I die, the Eastern Territories would be divided among the regional lords, and there would almost certainly be war over the distribution. So we're looking for a vampire ambitious enough to risk everything for power," she mused. "That could be half your court." "Unfortunately accurate," he agreed, "but we'll find them. I have people watching everyone suspicious." The answer came from an unexpected source. Seraphine burst into Gavril's study one evening, her usually composed demeanor shattered. "My lord," she gasped, "it's Lady Isolde. We've traced the payments to accounts she controls. She's been funding the hunters." Gavril's expression went cold and terrifying. "Bring her to me, now." An hour later, Isolde stood in the study, surrounded by guards. She looked defiant, her chin raised, her eyes blazing with anger. "Are you truly so pathetic?" she spat at Gavril. 800 years old, and you've been brought low by a human? A plain, plump little nobody who wouldn't know elegance if it bit her?" Priscilla flinched at the words, old insecurities rising, but Gavril moved faster than thought. He was across the room in an instant, his hand around Isolde's throat, lifting her off her feet. "You will not speak of her that way," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Priscilla is worth 1,000 of you. She has courage, compassion, and a gift that saved my life when all your beauty and breeding couldn't. She is everything you pretend to be and will never achieve. Isolde clawed at his hand, her face contorting. You loved me once. I was mistaken, Gavril said coldly. I confused physical attraction for something deeper. But Priscilla has shown me what real love is. She threw herself in front of a silver bullet for me. What have you ever sacrificed for anyone but yourself? He released her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping. The council will hear of this. You've violated protocols, fallen in love with a human. They'll do nothing, Gavril interrupted, because I am the king of the Eastern Territories, and my word is law within my domain. As for you, Isolde, you've committed treason. You've funded hunters who killed vampires, who broke sacred treaties. The penalty is death. Isolde went pale, true fear finally showing in her eyes. Gavril, please. I was jealous. I wanted you back. I thought if she was gone, I would have hunted you to the ends of the earth and destroyed you myself, he said flatly. But Priscilla is generous where I am not. She lives, and so I will show you mercy. Exile instead of death. You have until sunrise to leave my territory. If you ever return, if I ever hear your name associated with any threat to what's mine, I will end you. Am I clear? Isolde nodded frantically, and Gavril gestured to his guards. Remove her. Ensure she leaves the territory. When they were alone again, Gavril turned to Priscilla. She was standing by the window screen, arms wrapped around herself. Are you all right? He asked gently. She called me plain and plump, Priscilla said, trying to keep her voice steady. And the horrible thing is, she's not wrong. I am those things. I'm never going to look like a vampire, all elegant and— Stop, Gavril commanded, crossing to her. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. You listen to me, Priscilla Ashford. I have lived for 8 centuries. I have known beauty in all its forms, classical, modern, elegant, wild, and not one of those beautiful creatures ever made me feel what you make me feel. But do you know what I see when I look at you? He continued. I see strength. I see curves that fit perfectly in my arms. I see eyes that reflect intelligence and compassion. I see hands that glow with healing light. I see a woman who is brave enough to love a monster, generous enough to save his life, and foolish enough to doubt that she's the most beautiful thing I've ever beheld. Tears streamed down Priscilla's cheeks. You really see all that? I really do, he said, wiping her tears away with his thumbs. And I need you to see it too. I need you to understand that you are perfect exactly as you are, not in spite of your curves or your humanity or anything else, but because of them, because they make you who you are, and who you are is everything to me. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight. I love you so much. I love you too, he murmured into her hair, my brave healer, my Priscilla. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other. Finally, Priscilla pulled back enough to look up at him. I've made a decision, she said, about the turning, about immortality. Gavril went very still. Tell me. I want it, she said. Not right away. I want a few more years of humanity, of being able to eat and sleep and experience the world as I am. But eventually, yes, I want forever with you, Gavril. I want centuries to learn and grow and love you. I want to see the world change, want to develop my gifts beyond what humans can achieve. I want it all, with you. His eyes blazed with emotion. Are you certain? Once it's done, there's no going back. I'm certain, she said. You showed me what my life could be. You gave me confidence and love and a place where I belong. How could I not want forever with you? Gavril kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring all his love and relief and joy into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. 5 years, he said. Live as human for 5 more years. Experience everything you want to experience. And then, if you still want this, I will turn you myself. I will make you immortal, and we will have eternity together. 5 years, she agreed, and then forever. The years that followed were the happiest of Priscilla's life. She continued working as Gavril's healer, her reputation growing until she was known throughout the vampire world as a miracle worker. She published papers on vampire physiology, developed new healing techniques, and trained other healers in methods she'd pioneered. But more than her professional achievements, she treasured the relationship she built with Gavril. They traveled together, seeing the world through his ancient eyes and her modern ones. He showed her vampire society in all its complexity, the courts and councils, the ancient traditions and modern adaptations. She showed him humanity at its best, art and music and innovation, the beauty and mortality and change. They faced challenges, of course. There were vampires who disapproved of their relationship, who thought a king should choose an immortal mate. There were humans who feared what Priscilla had become, not quite human anymore after drinking Gavril's blood, but not yet vampire. The blood bond had changed her in subtle ways. She aged more slowly now. Her healing gift had amplified, and she could sense Gavril's emotions, feel when he was near, as if they were connected by invisible threads. But they weathered every challenge together. Gavril proved to be exactly what he'd promised, protective and devoted, worshipping her with his actions as much as his words. He commissioned paintings of her, wrote poetry about her, ensured that everyone in his territory knew that she was cherished above all others. And Priscilla learned to see herself through his eyes. The insecurities that had plagued her for so long gradually faded, as she understood that true beauty had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with who you were and how you loved. She was beautiful because she was brave and kind and gifted. She was beautiful because Gavril loved her, and his love transformed her understanding of herself. On the eve of her transformation, 5 years after that first night when she'd saved his life, Gavril took her to a private chamber deep in the heart of his residence. It was a beautiful room, lit by hundreds of candles, with a bed draped in silk and walls covered in tapestries, depicting scenes from his long life. "Are you ready?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "I'm ready," she said, and she was. She'd lived fully as human these past 5 years. She'd said goodbye to her family, or at least the goodbye that came with knowing she'd be different next time they met. She'd experienced everything she'd wanted to experience. Now she was ready for the next chapter. "It will hurt," Gavril warned. "The transformation is intense, but I'll be with you every moment. I won't leave your side." "I trust you," she said simply. He drew her close, tilting her head to expose her throat. "I love you, Priscilla Ashford. In all my centuries, I have never loved anyone as I love you, and I will spend eternity proving it to you." "I love you too," she whispered, "now and forever." His fangs pierced her throat, and she gasped at the sensation. Pain and pleasure mixed together in a way that made her dizzy. He drank deeply, taking her mortal blood, her mortal life. She felt herself weakening, felt her heartbeat slowing, felt the world beginning to fade. Then he bit his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. "Drink and be reborn." She drank his blood, so much more than she'd taken before. It burned through her like fire, remaking her from the inside out. Her human cells died and were replaced by something else, something immortal. The pain was excruciating, but true to his word, Gavril held her through all of it, murmuring words of love and encouragement, his presence an anchor in the storm of transformation. The process took 3 days, 3 days of death and rebirth, of fevered dreams and agony, and moments of transcendent clarity. And through it all, Gavril never left her side. He held her, cooled her burning skin, fed her his blood, and loved her through the worst of it. When she finally opened her eyes on the 4th day, everything had changed. The world was sharper now, colors more vivid, sounds more distinct. She could hear Gavril's unnecessary heartbeat, could smell the ancient stone of the walls, could feel the power thrumming through her newly immortal body. And her gift, oh, her gift had exploded into something magnificent. She could see the energy fields of living things, could sense illness and injury from across a room, could channel healing power that made her previous abilities look like parlor tricks. "How do you feel?" Gavril asked, his voice soft with wonder. She sat up, marveling at the strength in her body, the grace in her movements. She looked down at her hands and saw they were still her hands, still the capable, strong hands of a healer. But now they glowed with golden light even at rest, a visible manifestation of her power. Then she looked in the mirror across the room and gasped. Her hair had lightened to white gold, and her skin had taken on that pale, luminous quality all vampires possessed. But her face was still her face, her curves still her curves. The transformation had made her immortal, had enhanced her gifts, but it hadn't changed who she fundamentally was. "I'm still me," she said in wonder. "Of course you are," Gavril said, coming to stand behind her. In the mirror, they looked right together, two immortals, two souls bound by love and blood. "Did you think becoming vampire would erase what makes you extraordinary? You are still Priscilla, still brilliant and brave and beautiful, simply immortal now." She turned to face him, and the love she felt was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me forever." "Thank you," he countered, "for saving my life, for teaching me how to live again, for choosing me, choosing this, choosing us." He kissed her then, and it was different than before. She could match his strength now, could meet him as an equal. The kiss deepened, became desperate, became a celebration of everything they'd overcome and everything that lay ahead. When they finally broke apart, Gavril smiled a rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Welcome to immortality, my love," he said. "Welcome to forever." The years turned into decades, and the decades into centuries. Priscilla and Gavril became a legend in vampire society, the warrior king and his healer queen, as she eventually became known. She never took an official title, but everyone acknowledged her as Gavril's equal, his partner in all things. Together, they strengthened the human-vampire treaties, creating new programs for cooperation and understanding. Priscilla's medical innovations saved countless lives, both human and vampire. She trained generations of healers, teaching them to look beyond appearance to the true nature of a person's gift. And through it all, Gavril worshipped her. He commissioned statues of her, established hospitals in her name, and never missed an opportunity to tell anyone who would listen that his greatest achievement wasn't conquering territories or maintaining peace, but winning the love of Priscilla Ashford. On their 100th anniversary, he threw a ball in her honor. Vampires came from all corners of the world to celebrate, and Priscilla, now comfortable in her immortal skin, confident in her power and her place, stood beside her king and greeted them all with grace. Later that night, alone in their chambers, Gavril pulled her close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your humanity, your mortal life?" Priscilla thought about the question seriously. She thought about her family, long dead now but remembered with love. She thought about the simplicity of human life, the flavor of food, the necessity of sleep. She thought about all the things she'd given up. Then she looked at Gavril, at the vampire who'd seen past her insecurities to the truth of who she was, who'd loved her when she couldn't love herself, who'd given her centuries of joy and purpose and belonging. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me everything, Gavril. You gave me confidence and love and a place where I belong. You showed me that beauty isn't about appearance. It's about character and courage and the capacity to love. You made me see myself as precious, and that changed everything." "You did the same for me," he said softly. "I was so bored, so tired of existence. Then you burst into my life with your golden light and your brave heart, and suddenly I had a reason to keep going. You saved my life in more ways than one, Priscilla." She kissed him, pouring all her love into the gesture. When they broke apart, she rested her head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat he maintained purely out of habit. "I love you," she said, "for the rest of forever." "I love you too," he replied, "my healer, my queen, my everything." Outside their window, or rather, the screen that showed the outside world, the sun was rising over New York City. Once upon a time, sunrise had meant Gavril needed to retreat to safety. But Priscilla's research had led to breakthroughs in vampire physiology, treatments that allowed older vampires to tolerate limited sun exposure. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't safe for extended periods, but it was progress. Gavril had been able to watch a sunrise with her for the first time just last year, and the joy on his face had been worth every hour of research, every failed experiment, every frustration along the way. Now he held her as they watched the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, two immortals who'd found forever in each other's arms. The girl who'd been mocked for her size and dismissed for her appearance had become a legendary healer, a vampire queen in all but name, and the eternal love of a king. And the vampire who'd thought he'd seen everything, experienced everything, learned that there were still miracles in the world, that sometimes salvation came in unexpected packages. That love could bloom in the darkest places and transform everything it touched. They stood together as the sun rose higher, neither of them quite willing to retreat to shadow yet. And in that moment, bathed in dangerous light, they were perfect two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd chosen love over fear, who'd built a forever that would outlast empires. The world would continue turning, humans would live and die, vampires would scheme and rule and eventually fade. But Priscilla and Gavril would endure, two constants in a changing world, two hearts bound by blood and love and unbreakable devotion. And if sometimes Priscilla thought back to that night when she'd dropped a blood bag and heard the whispers start, when she'd been nobody special and nobody's priority, well, she smiled at the memory now, because that girl who'd doubted herself, who'd absorbed every cruel word and believed she wasn't enough, she'd been wrong. She'd always been enough. She'd always been extraordinary. She just needed someone to see it, to reflect it back to her until she could see it herself. And Gavril had done exactly that. He'd loved her into believing she was lovable. He'd worshipped her until she understood she was worthy of worship. He'd given her centuries to prove to herself what he'd known from the moment she placed her glowing hands on his chest and saved his life. That Priscilla Ashford was a miracle. And miracles, as everyone knows, last forever.